Hi, welcome to this episode of The Wellbeing Show. I'm Noel, I'm your host, and I've got a fantastic guest with me, Dr. Cheryl Green, who's by the magic of Grayskull, or the power of Grayskull, it used to be when I was a kid. We've got transatlantic connection because Dr. Green's over in Los Angeles, Greater Los Angeles area at the moment, and has joined us as she's just published a new book about the state of play, psychiatric state of play, mental health state of play for girls and young women at the moment, based on some sort of very credible research about the rising interest, rising incidence of psychiatric problems amongst girls. And it's not just in the US, it's a transcultural phenomenon. So I'm very excited to have her on. Welcome, Dr. Green. It's really lovely to have you here. You're over in Los Angeles right now. It's about, what, 4:30? No,
Yes.
it's 8:30 for you, I think, something like that.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Noel. So nice. And so nice to chat with you just now a little bit. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I was very excited when I got the email from your publicity company about your book. I mean, it just stood out and I went, oh, yeah, I got to talk to her about that and get you on and sort of discussing it because we've been seeing in the UK. I'm going to ask you about your experience in the US and what's contained in the book, but we've been seeing significant rises in problems for children, mental health problems for children, and specifically around girls. And we were talking about this just before we started recording. Significant rises in hospital admissions for eating disorders, for self-harming, and a lot of those, the majority of those would be girls. And as you know, anorexia, eating disorders, so I have some of the highest mortality rates of any mental health condition. They're very dangerous mental health conditions that need very skilled intervention. And we see that on the rise, and that's very worrying. But what is it that you were finding? First of all, just tell me the name of the book so that everybody knows what it's called.
Oh, yeah. The book is called Heal Your Daughter. So it's by me, Cheryl L. Green. Yeah, the book is Heal Your Daughter, and it's about how to save your daughter from depression, cutting, and suicidal thoughts.
Thank you. And there's a link, and we'll discuss it more, but there's a link between deliberate self-harm, that's a term we use in the UK. Cutting is what you said. Deliberate self-harm, usually cutting, although it could involve other things. But deliberate self-harm is often thought of as part of the suicide spectrum of experiences, as part of what we call suicidal ideation. Deliberate self-harm is within that sort of spectrum of behavior. You have MD at the end of your name, so let's just discuss what that means first, so people understand what you're not a doctor of philosophy, you're a medical doctor who's a psychiatrist, right?
Yeah, well, I have a complex history. I have an MD and a PhD. I did the PhD first, but I went to Stanford to get my MD and graduated from that in 2011. And then went on to residency. Here in the US, we have a little bit more elaborate training process, I believe, for psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry than in the UK. So here it takes 4 years of undergrad. So I did that at Harvard University in Boston in the US. And then I went then I got a PhD at Princeton University, but that was in English literature. That was in a different field. Then I raised my own 3 kids, 1 girl and 2 boys. Then I went back to medical school, graduating from Stanford University Medical School in 2011. Then I went to residency at Georgetown in Washington, D.C., Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C. And then I did a fellowship in addition to that here in Dayton, Ohio in the U.S. So it's a very long process. But here I am. After that, I started working at Loma Linda University School of Medicine, where I'm still an assistant professor there. And I work with this group that I wrote the book for. I work with teen girls. We have here these programs called intensive outpatient programs, where there are these programs lasting 8 to 10 weeks, 3 hours, 3 days a week. So it's like 9 hours each week for 8 to 10 weeks. For the girls who are just out of hospital, they're chronically suicidal, they're cutting themselves. Really, we have this term in America, we say hot mess. So these are the groups. I have several of these groups, and this is my specialty area. This is my area of expertise.
The reason I'm asking the qualifications, so you don't need to worry about the microphone. We can hear your voice, so drop the microphone.
Oh, great.
I can hear it anyway. The reason I'm asking, because I think there's going to be a central point about your book, about the efficacy side of your book. You want it has a purpose, which is to educate parents and families on how they can set up healing systems within the family to help. And the reason for that is because all training for mental health professionals takes a long time. And all training around the globe this is. And I'm going to give an example of what I'm talking about here and why I'm particularly interested in what it is you're saying. So I was being interviewed on a radio show about the earthquake that happened in Turkey. It was a television show about the earthquake that happened in Turkey. And so when these natural disasters happen, governments around the world send resources to them. And so tents arrive and doctors arrive and nurses arrive, and also as they should. And they were asking me about PTSD and the rise of PTSD, which we know will happen after an event like that. But it was predicated on this notion that there is somehow a group of mental health professionals somewhere in the world that you can parachute into somewhere and then they can sort, and that just doesn't exist. The truth is, and this is the truth around many countries, developed countries, that we don't have enough mental health professionals as it is. And we're not
that's true.
A huge influx, and that's not going to happen. And we have to be realistic about that. And we don't, neither you or I or nobody wants to see kids in a psych ward. That's not a solution for a child. It may happen, but it's not what we want to see, right? And so you book, I guess, based on those actual facts, that there are limited professional mental health resources. And so what do we do about that? Is that right?
Right. I would say that's right now. I mean, it used to be, I think, somewhat adequate, but there has been such a rise here in America. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, came out with statistics just recently, giving a summary of the trends from 2011 to 2021. And it's just shocking, startling, the rise. It rose from what was already high to something that's astronomically high, where now the situation of high school girls is that 57% of them, so way over half, almost 2/3, have been persistently hopeless or depressed in the past 1 year. So, the depression rate's incredibly high. A third of girls, well, 30%, almost a third, said they'd been having suicidal thoughts over the past year. 24%, so almost a quarter, said, yeah, I have suicidal thoughts with a plan, which actually here in America is the criterion for inpatient admission. So what are we going to do when a quarter of high school girls, are feeling suicidal thoughts with a plan? Are we going to have, like in every high school, there's an inpatient unit? These numbers we can't address. And then one of the more startling statistics too was 13% of our high school students here in America are girls. 13% of them said, yeah, in the past year, I have attempted suicide. So imagine that, over 10% of your high school girls have attempted suicide in the last year. And that's the situation we face here in America. Now, there have been some international studies. There was one recently, I believe the author was Menon, who did a study of 8 of the more developed countries, including Britain. And the rates were similar. The U.S. was a little bit farther along, but really the rates everywhere are high for all of these things.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a question here, because I think one of the narratives, the counter narratives to this, tends to be in the media, are kids just too soft these days? Is this why we're seeing a rise in these numbers? Because we're seeing similar rise in numbers in the UK. And it wasn't just about the pandemic, although I think the pandemic speeded that numbers up. I mean, there was a jump up, and I think we saw that globally. Although that jump seems to have dropped somewhat, but the underlying trend was up anyway. So, for example, 46% increase in hospital admissions for eating disorders happened prior to the pandemic.
Yes.
So we already had this significant upward trend.
Yes.
Children, but in particular around girls, around deliberate self-harm and eating disorders, and that's continued. And even though that explosive peak has dropped off from the pandemic, that upward trend is still there. That's what we're seeing in the UK.
That's right. And in America, it hasn't really dropped off that much.
Right.
These rates are about the same now. I've not seen any decrease. I do work sometimes on call in our hospital, Loma Linda University Hospital. There are often 12 girls sitting there overnight waiting for a hospital bed, which, isn't available.
Yes.
Then they have to be transferred out. And people are calling us like mad, trying to transfer their excess patients to us. And so it's really crisis levels. Now, we didn't see a rise so much in boys, high school boys coming to the ER, but girls doubled. High school girls doubled. So that really is a crisis for teen girls.
Let's talk about that briefly, because I think what we see with men gender differences, there are gender differences in the expression of mental health. Men and young boys, young men and boys and men tend to, in terms of suicide figures, take up successful suicide. So 75% of deaths from taking your own life are male. And that's a real problem. And what we see is, certainly in the UK, a split between girls and young women and women being diagnosed with the more common mental health problems, so anxiety, depression, etc., whereas guys being diagnosed with the more severe mental health problems such as psychosis and bipolar, etc. Although I think there's quite a parity in bipolar, but certainly in psychotic numbers. I don't know if that's the same in the US, but it tends to be that boys are not asking for help at the point that girls are, and often you'll see girls asking for help or these type of behaviors, and the choice of the plan that girls make around suicide tend to be less permanent. So they're choosing suicide methods that aren't.
Yeah, that's really a known thing. Girls attempt suicide way more than boys do, but boys tend to use more lethal means like guns. They use firearms, and it's hard to come back from a firearm explosion. I've had exactly one boy who shot himself in the temple and somehow survived it. Exactly one patient.
The same
usually
without guns. We see boys using permanent methods of taking
hanging,
hanging, driving a car. So if you take single occupancy automobile accidents or car accidents, we call them, they're predominantly male. Going
I see.
Going into the sea and drowning in the etc. These types of deaths are predominantly male, and it's really, that's what we see. And so there's a significant problem across the genders, but we're going to sort of specifically focus on, if you like, on young women, because this is your area and the figures, and sort of from your perspective as a psychiatrist who's dealing with these girls coming into the wards and then being discharged to what?
Right.
And so we. In the UK, many years ago, we brought in what was called care in the community legislation, because we were seeing that institutionalization has its own problems. So having people in long-term institutional care has its own problems. But also, even, a relatively short period of time in an institution can stabilize somebody, and then they're discharged, and then they destabilize and they come back into the institution because they can't cope, because there's not enough support out there. So you have stabilization, discharge, destabilization, readmission, stabilization, discharge, destabilization, readmission. And this was called the revolving door.
Well, what happens is they go back to the same world that made them sick in the first place. That's the sad thing. They go back to the same world. Over the pandemic in particular, those years here, girls saw tremendous rises in a lot of things. But I think one of the most impactful ones was that lockdown, the isolation, that
Yeah.
something about teen girls and social isolation. I think that was one of the key factors. Their real relationships, which are always, the thing that makes teen girls live. They live relationship. As a grown-up teen girl myself, I know that um, the real relationships got displaced with social media use. And, social media, we have had hundreds of studies of the effects of social media on depression. And the more hours per day you are there paying attention to social media, the higher depression scores rise. And that's just a fact. We know that's it. And when it displaces the
Sorry, Dr. Green, is there a difference in the research? Is there a difference between gender responses to the time on social media as well? Does it more affect girls more with depression and suicidal stuff? My intuition would be yes, because of body shaming and because of image issues and perfectionism for girls. But is that true? Is it more impactful upon girls?
I think it's everyone. Most of the studies have both genders, but what I see a lot of is more girls using more hours of social media because they're not as drawn to the video games, whereas guys are often drawn over to the video gaming world. And I don't see that as much in the teen girls. I see them doing the social media or watching anime, but I see boys doing a lot more, frankly, of pornography and video games than girls do. Often girls don't use any
Very,
pornography at all, no video games at all, but they're on social media
yeah. But
a
my son is
lot.
drawn to the games. He likes those online games, and often they're an extension of his real world relationships. So he's playing them with his school friends and things like that, and
Hmm.
their social interaction. But they are very male oriented world. Those social.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you're a girl gamer, you're quite rare, I think, in terms of my experience. So, what are the factors do you think, apart from these disruption to real world relationships? So we say we saw a rise in problems with girls prior to the pandemic anyway. What are types of factors do you think in the world that are leading
Well,
these rises in sort of sort of depression, anxiety, self-harming for girls?
yeah, well, a lot of the things that were picked up on that CDC report were there. Was more academic failure there among girls. I guess it's harder to learn something like math when little lens as opposed to being there in person, being able to ask questions freely. There's a lot more academic failure, which is, upsetting. There was more drug use. There's actually more sexual assault, actually. A lot of kids were left unattended and they were hanging out, and a lot more of that happened. There was a lot more bullying, in particular cyberbullying. Without the school food, there was a lot worse kind of eating. A lot of girls kind of stopped eating during the pandemic, and there was a development. We saw a rise of eating disorders. And we don't know why that is, but there suddenly uh, during the pandemic there was a lot more of that as well.
Sorry to
So
interrupt.
many factors, many factors.
Can you say that bit about the rise in food issues? Because the signal cut off at that point. Unfortunately, our signal isn't great, but we'll just work with it and continue. So,
Okay.
what did the research show in terms of? You were saying because of the removal of school food, there were then some more complicated issues around food. If you can repeat that.
Yes. When girls were home, often they were telling me, "Oh, I'm not eating, my school lunch, my school breakfast. I'm just having a few snacks or nothing at all." So most of the eating pattern of the girls I was seeing, the high school girls here in America, was definitely, I don't eat meals, I just have a few snacks. And those snacks are highly processed junk food that offers nothing in the way of nutrition. And the girls I saw falling apart nutritionally, and many of them developing this pattern of starving themselves and then binging on junk food, starving themselves and then binging on junk food, which is the very recipe for weight gain. We know that the more you diet, the more you gain in weight. It's not the reverse. It's the more you diet, the more you gain weight. And then, of course, that put a lot of girls into a tailspin, just suddenly having a body they didn't like, and then the cutting starts and all of that. So it was a recipe for disaster, these recent years of the pandemic. And girls really experienced that disaster. So
What was sexual assaults? I didn't quite get the link. What was the research showing?
there were rise in sexual assault, sexual transgressions among girls. And I think that one would have to do with the fact that without the school setting, they're home alone, sometimes attended, sometimes not attended.
Yeah.
I had a lot of patients, boys who were real experts at getting in top story windows and things like that I was hearing about. I had one patient that the only patient I've ever lost was not suicidal. She was actually leaving her window to go visit a boyfriend. So, and she fell on the concrete. So, I mean, a lot of people were unattended and they were not chaperoned, and they were doing things that really caused a lot of grief in the long run.
So what it sounds like is there was a major, as we know, that period of time was a major disruption to all the regulators, all the points of reference of normality, all the breaks on unhealthy behavior. So this sort of regular food routine that you got from going to school, all of those things were broken. And that created quite a crash for a number of girls. Our experience, and I wonder if it was yours as well, was that if we think of mental health and wellness along a spectrum, for example, and so here's the full spectrum, and then here is unwell, these are the goalposts, and these are super well, that the whole population shifted along, as it were. And so people who were close to being unwell then became very unwell. People who were very unwell were very seriously unwell. But the whole population shifted across that spectrum.
Yes.
And
And
then,
I think you're right. Starting with that started back as far as the millennials, kids born in the 90s.
yeah,
And you had referred earlier to this increase in anxiety that a whole generation, starting with the millennials, feels. It is different. I think that's a reality. There is more anxiety, and it tends to be free-floating anxiety
yes.
among the millennials and onward. And there are two attitudes you can take to it. Some people do say, oh yeah, snowflake, it's negative, but
we'll
it's
get to
not their fault. Yeah, I believe it's not their fault. It's something profound that's happened to change the culture and
Can
even
you
the biological makeup.
can you explain what you mean by free-floating anxiety? So for people that may not understand that term, I know what you mean, but just explain that a little bit more.
Oh yeah, free-floating anxiety. You're anxious. There's something to be dreaded. There's some impending doom or something bad is about to happen. And you're anxious and you feel ill at ease, and you can even feel it in your body and your stomach. We call it the midline physical. You can feel it in your stomach, you can feel it in your heart, you can feel it in your throat, you feel it all over. And it's just this free-floating, nameless anxiety. You can't put your finger on why. You don't know why you're anxious, but you're anxious. That has risen tremendously. And I see a lot of patients, almost every patient who comes to me for depression, I ask them now about their anxiety, and all of them report this.
Yeah.
Even if there's nothing to be anxious about, they're getting straight A's, they have loving parents, they have friends, everything's going fine. They have this nameless, free-floating anxiety that they don't like, but they want to get rid of it, and they don't know where it came from. So that's something they're dealing with that wasn't there for my generation. Certainly wasn't there.
And certainly that's significant in terms of health and well-being, isn't it? Because what that means is that there are stress hormones flooding the body, and we know that stress hormones are deadly.
Yes, over time, yes, they can make you obese. they raise your blood sugar. They can trigger, having all that cortisol can make it more likely that you get physically ill with diabetes or obesity, the whole metabolic syndrome.
Yeah.
And not to mention the emotional consequences of that, being afraid. And so you pin it on this or that. Well, maybe it's academic. Maybe you don't perform as well then because of your anxiety. Maybe you think it's social. So maybe you don't go out there and make as many true lifelong friends that are going to make you happy forever. You just don't attempt it because you're kind of anxious. You don't know why, but maybe it's this, maybe it's that, and so you don't live an adventuresome, fearless life. You don't live bravely and fearlessly like that old World War II generation, or even my generation tried to do that, to live fearlessly, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a great description. And you were saying about the sort of cultural responses to this from maybe older people is to start blaming kids and young people and saying, there's something wrong with you, lot. What's wrong with you? Is that something that you experience and understand?
Yeah, I think there is a blaming and there is a lack of understanding. But, that generation that blames is also the one that's picking up the pieces, by the way. I have so many patients who are being raised by their grandparents, by that grandparents, because the generation right now of the parents, so many of them have been knocked out by drugs, particularly here in the US. We have the opioid crisis, and that's knocked out a lot of parents. The grandparents are stepping up, God bless them, in many, many cases.
I
So
think,
that's going on.
yeah,
There is a lack of understanding, and imagine the generation gap there between the kids today and the grandparents who are raising them. So, I think there is that, kind of like lack of understanding. How could this be?
we haven't seen the opioid crisis the same in Europe and the UK. As you know, there's quite a distinct cultural reasons for that. But what we have seen increase in alcohol use, and that's been the equivalent in the UK.
Okay.
Significant problems with alcohol use. Go to any A&E department on a Friday. A&E is emergency ER. If you go to any ER on a Friday evening in the UK, it's essentially a drunk tank. There is so much sort of alcohol use and abuse on at the moment. And again, we saw the rise of that during the pandemic, but it was already rising prior to that. And as you know, alcohol has significant problems in terms of social functioning and interpersonal functioning, and it's quite destructive on every level. In the US, I don't think you have the same issues around alcohol use because you regulate it much more than we do. So you can't get it till you're 21 often. Whereas in the UK, you can get it much younger and there's much more.
I see.
So, but there is similar issues. And I guess I want to sort of deal with this question about these intergenerational sort of views on there's somehow this strange view of older people who survived the Second World War, etc., as somehow more resilient and tougher than us, but they weren't. If you look at the figures from that time, the highest divorce rates were just after the Second World War, when guys were coming back from the front line with undiagnosed and untreated PTSD and were awful to be around. Guys, we didn't help those guys. And families broke down significantly. And I would say that in many ways, we're still living with the consequences of that in further generations. As you know, trauma itself is intergenerational. It could be passed on biologically through the amygdala. And
absolutely.
Intergenerational. And in some ways, certainly, I think in the rise of addiction, there's a strong research and theoretical basis for arguing that that's due to societal trauma, and that's how the organism responds to.
Most definitely. There's also an intergenerational healing that can occur, though, as people become more and more enlightened about what works, what helps, what heals. And we know so much more nowadays about what helps and what heals, what promotes life, what promotes health and mental health than we did then.
Yeah.
We have all this information now about the things that are actually healing generations successively. And you see the kids getting stronger and stronger and stronger in some areas, you know.
Let,
So I think it goes both ways with the intergenerational stuff.
I think
Yeah,
that, let's talk about that a bit. I'm sorry about this. There is a time lag, and it may look like we're talking across each other, but it's just a fact. There's a time lag in the, and it's fine. So let's talking about some of those factors of change. So the first step for me as a mental health professional, the first thing I always say to people is the thing that makes you well is you start asking for help. That's where you have to start. You have to recognize you've got a problem, and then you go and ask for help, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Asking for help instead of self-medicating, because the self-medicating never works. When you go and self-medicate with alcohol or cannabis or one of many other, there's a whole smorgasbord out there now of drugs. When you self-medicate with those, you end up going down and down and down. And there are only like three paths basically that come out of that addiction. You either stop, or you're institutionalized, or you die. And those three pathways are really clear here in the States as the stakes on the self-medication become higher and higher,
And
with all of these opioids.
would you place not just substances, but would you place processes and behaviors within that medication stuff as well? So, for example, would you, as a practitioner, understand unhealthy relationships to food or deliberate self-harm as part of that process? I'm not calling it addiction because I'm not. I don't want to go there because I don't agree with that, and I think it's quite dangerous just to label it as addiction. But in terms of unhelpful coping mechanisms, let's call them that. Sort of, what's your understanding of those behaviors within that sort of framing?
Well, the consequences are not as immediately dire, with drugs, one pill can kill, but with eating, we all eat, we all love sugar. Sugar itself is addictive. If you look at rats in the little thing pressing their levers, the little rats pressing the lever for sugar versus pressing the lever for cocaine, they'll pick the sugar every time. So we know that sugar is addictive in itself. And there are many substances within food that are frankly obesogenic. Now, I don't know about the British food supply, but in the America, they deliberately put obesogens and addictive substances, or sometimes they're the same substance, like MSG, which is both an obesogen and addictive, into processed food. And most processed foods in America will have that in it. People say, I don't want any MSG, it gives me a headache. And so what they discovered long ago was that you can't call MSG, monosodium glutamate. You call it these 24 other names, like natural flavors, natural organic flavors are, of course, good for you. And like they greenwash the MSG, which is what it is. And it's frankly both addictive and obesogenic, but that's one of many. BPA is obesogenic. There are many obesogens tucked into these foods. And there are many addictive substances other than that. Sugar I mentioned is addictive. Caffeine is addictive. They put caffeine in so many of the soft drinks. So, I mean, the food supply is not what it was. So can overeating be considered an addiction? Well, I guess it depends what you're eating. I think, if you eat what's recommended in lifestyle medicine, if you're eating the whole food plant-based diet and you're eating real stuff that's organic and carefully made and unprocessed to the degree possible. So the whole food is unprocessed. Plant-based is like 90% of it is plant. So you're getting the whole array of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, all 5,000 or so phytonutrients. We haven't even characterized all of those. So we don't truly know what they do to our health or mental health. If you're eating that way, you're not going to be addicted. You're going to be coming out nutritionally repleted and at a normal body weight, it turns out. When you eat the whole food plant-based diet, that's the only group that has normal body weight. And it's probably the only group that isn't addicted, because not eating processed foods, you're not going to be getting all of these obesogens and addictive substances they put into
Yeah.
processed foods in that industry, or
Yeah.
the heavy metals in that industry.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot of whistleblowers on that one, the heavy metals that are in there.
There's been, certainly in the UK and Europe, there's been quite a backlash against over-industrialized food that's been over-processed and industrialized to make it convenient. I'm not a great believer that the conspiracy. Some people think there's a conspiracy to do X, Y, and Z. I just think they make more money out of it because they make the ingredients go further. But for human beings, that's a disaster. That, you know, food that is good for you is food that doesn't have a long list of additives. It's really simple. The longer that list is, the more you should avoid it, to be honest, like the plague.
Yeah, that's true. And we know too that a lot of the ingredients in processed food do not appear on that label.
Yeah.
Even in the UK, because things like pH balancers, things you assume are fine, are not necessarily fine. And they may list, you know, like a food coloring, natural food coloring. But do you know that that was made in an aluminum lake? For example, it's got heavy metals in it. So a lot of the things that are in that food don't even show up on the label from the get-go if it's processed. That's why, you know, unprocessed, just going to the farmer's market, you know, the farmer, you know, he doesn't spray, you know, or she. A lot of these farmers at our farmer markets in America are now females. It's all females now doing the farm. Farmer Joe is now Farmer Jane or whatever. You know, you're getting the food, you're getting it from a good source you trust. You eat that, you purify your water, and then you know you're not going to be addicted to your food. You're going to be eating whole food, real food. There's no substitute for real food in terms of human health.
In terms of this sort of process, though, there is something that has happened, I think, where certainly a lot of young people and older people now have become used to this sort of comfort eating cycle because they're not aware that actually what's been placed into their food or the way the food has been made makes it work emotionally. And it's a quick win, I guess, if you go and have some comfort food. You don't have to go to the hard work of forming stable human loving relationships to deal with your anxiety. You know, it's sort of, and particularly when that seems problematic because there's a pandemic or there's economic insecurity or there's wars or there's, you know, the effort of making these nourishing relationships when you can feel okay, and you can feel okay for a short time when you put the burger in your mouth, instead of the effort of going to somebody and saying, I don't feel good. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I know.
Set.
You turn to your best friends, Ben and Jerry or Hagen, Doss, you know, your very closest friends are there in the freezer for you. Yeah, I know. That's really humorous.
But that's a problem if that's repeated. And the problem is that when we repeat a behavior associated with a feeling, we are producing myelinated passive pathways in our personalities so that we're more likely in future to choose that as opposed to choose the other route, which is healthier for us. And the other route that's healthier for us, and I think we should talk a bit about, is that we have these nourishing, life-affirming relationships that we can rely upon. And that's not just going to mental health professionals like yourself, but you're quite an advocate, I know, of empowering the public and empowering families, if you like, to be their own prescription. And so maybe
absolutely,
we can
absolutely
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, since there is such a crisis in mental health, there isn't that availability of providers, but there is so much you can do at home for your teens. There's so much you can do. You can create that ecosystem of health. And part of it, you know, as the parent or grandparent or other caregiver, you're responsible for what's in the fridge. You're responsible for what's on that table. You know, you're the one who's there, who's driving often your kid to so-and-so's house or inviting them or calling the parents. You know, so many kids feel as though there's something uniquely wrong about them in terms of their social skills. But a lot of that, what that boils down to is a parental malfunction. The parent has not called the parents, made those connections, made that ease of going to dinner together with the whole family, the whole parents, and your kids come along. Or yes, so and so can come over to the home. The parents need to open that relationship. It's too much these days in our culture for the kid to do it himself. There have to be permissions granted for the friendship to even begin. So parents, at least in America, are the gatekeepers because it's so unsafe out there.
Yeah.
And so, I think as parents, yeah, you have the obligation. You need to find out, who are the kids you want to socialize with? Who are they? What do their parents do? What are the names of their parents? So those connections, parent to parent, can be made first, and encourage that. Or if you belong to a club with the parents, that's ideal. Obviously, you're in the same club or whatever. You could just have your kids interact there. But yeah, parents do have a responsibility. They can create an environment that's either nurturing their child or not. And it takes so much more work now, and so much more effort, and so much more knowledge on the part of parents nowadays than it did back in the day. It was automatic. You didn't really need to do anything. Kids were free to roam from house to house. You didn't necessarily knew where they were. Go out and play was the thing.
You're
And
talking
that hasn't.
as when I was a child, that myself and my brother were similar in age, or about 11 months apart. So that was a very busy time for my mum. She gave birth to two boys, one after another, with only 11 months. I feel for her. Literally, when we were little boys, we were given sandwiches in the morning, told to go out of the house and not come back until dinner time in the evening, and that was it. That's that. We entertained ourselves, and that was known in the local community, and all the other kids did the same thing, and all the other parents. But actually, I think the parents knew each other, and they were communicating with each other, and they all knew each other's children. I grew up in a large city, but we were all in a fairly defined geographical area, and that was normal. That's what happened. When I would hurt myself, which little children do all the time, somebody else's parent would pick me up, make sure I was okay, and if I wasn't, would take me back to my mum because they knew my mum and stuff like that. And I think you're right that those connections don't seem to be there anymore. Why is that, do you think?
Well, it's a I don't know what it's like in Britain, but here it literally is a safety issue. You don't want your daughter going over to some house, and you don't know if that girl has a brother. You don't know who's in that house. So, you don't want to trust that. So really, the obligation and the onus is really on that parent to get to know people who would be, or if the girl really wants to make a segue and have those friendships, the parents really have to step in, make sure that house is safe. Who's in that house can she go into, at least in America? And that's so important, though. Social media, if that's the only way the girls are able to socialize, that's inherently depressing for a lot of reasons. There are whole books on why. That wasn't the topic of my book, but by the way, Jaron Lanier has a wonderful book on why social media is inherently depressing. But there's no substitute in any case for those real relationships. So yeah, parents can step up. They can get their daughters involved in organizations within the school. But beyond that, not just to go to the practice of the Little League or whatever it may be and to come back, but actually within that to make further friends, because you can't really talk and have those intimate one-to-one friendships in a group, even if it's a healthy thing like a sports group or ballet, or you have a circle of girls studying the same instrument often, where they'll have master classes or something like that. Or many girls will have like a private art tutor, and the other girls within that who are also students of that art teacher or creative writing teacher, what may be, they'll kind of know each other. But unless you make those connections on a parent-to-parent level, your girls won't really have many options. And you can't open your heart up in a group. You need the one-to-one. You need the best friend. I think there's been such a decline of the whole best friend concept. When I was younger, it was considered absolutely essential to child and adolescent development to have that best friend. Now, best friends are like far and few between. They're just, I think that's part of the problem for teen girls, why they're in crisis. And I think that's a lot of the gender confusion too. If you don't map on to a same-sex peer early on, which was once considered normal, how do you even know what it's like if you're mapping on to other guys in groups, and like you don't have the ability to speak out about what's really in your heart, what your likes, your dislikes, your values. You can't talk about that intimate stuff in a group, particularly if there are guys there or whatever.
What do you
So
think?
there's a lot of confusion.
What do you think is stopping modern parents then from forming these intimate one-to-one relationships with their peers who are the parents of the friends of their daughters and their children? Why do you think that's not happening at the moment?
In America, I think it's not happening because the parents are so overworked. I
Right.
mean, both parents are working, the mom is working, the dad is working. If they can just get home in time to fix dinner and help their kids with their homework, and then kind of crash completely on the weekend and do the tasks that need to be done on weekends, your basics of the household. I think there's just not that much time and energy and effort left to put into these social relationships, the clubs, at least in America back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, it was all about clubs. There's even a book about that. It's called Bowling Alone,
Yeah.
which describes how society really deteriorated in America. You no longer belong to these big clubs, and within the club you could identify specific people, and then it was natural, like the club provided the venue within which you could identify your you call them soulmate friends or whatever. Now it's, you're not going to just encounter somebody randomly on the street. You need those social organizations, those larger organizations to belong to. It's a rare community that has them. One of the reasons I live here in Redlands, they do have such organizations. It's just kind of a little island of sanity in the midst of the rest of America.
I mean,
But anyway,
that there isn't that much difference between the UK and America as you're describing it, because I would say, from my experience, these social connections have broken down in the UK as well. And
okay.
not as strong as they used to be where they do exist. And we're having to think about how we sort of reinvent them, if you like. We're having to reinvent that wheel because the spokes have been broken. And we have to think about how we do that. And I guess for similar types of reasons, a double income household, two parents working is the norm in the UK. Absolutely the norm. And it is still the norm that the father will earn more than the mum, and because of structural inequalities in wage differences, etc. This is the truth. But even with double incomes, families are struggling, and they're struggling particularly at the moment with the cost of living crisis. They're not making ends meet. I don't know if you know that term, but and that, certainly in the UK, we've seen wage levels stagnate for over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Been working harder and getting less for their money, and the cost of living has been going up. And so
Mm-hmm.
those real world pressures have been increasing. And I guess there is a tendency towards wanting to then, if you like, offload the childcare onto social media or school, or just hope that they're okay, that your kids are doing okay,
Mm-hmm.
because you're overwhelmed and exhausted as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess,
That's hitting America too, by the way, the financial crisis.
right,
So many of my kids now, they can't afford to adequately cool or heat their homes. And this is new in America. It used to be like, that's a no-brainer. Of course you're going to be warm or cool. In the summer you'll be cool, in the winter you'll be warm. And I heard that that was an issue there in Britain. That's getting to be an issue here in the States, which is shocking that things would get that bad here. But economically, yes, there's been this divide between the super uber wealthy and the rest of us.
well,
Yeah, and it's
make ends meet. All of us are. I think most of
mhm.
that boat. we're not Elon Musk, we're not whoever it is that these crazy people with unimaginable amounts of money. And
Yeah.
that what you're saying is that even though it's hard work, this is a necessary thing that we need to do. We need to form these connections. And it's almost like I'm almost hearing you say something around the parents have to model the outcomes they want from their kids. And that's a very familiar
Well,
story to me, I think.
yeah, yeah. It helps if the whole family approaches this social connectedness thing together. But if not, at least to insist that your teen girl is in these social venues, whether it be sports or ballet or something quasi-artistic, to get her involved. And within that, as a parent, make connections with somebody that she likes, with those parents, so that those friendships can exist.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they won't, and the development will really suffer. The
Yeah.
development of your child will suffer without that emotional connectedness. The child will become depressed. The child will have more anxiety. There
That's
is a need for that best friend. There is a need for that emotional connectedness that's safe. And to make it safe, you have to participate. If they, often they go on it on their own, they end up in groups that are not safe, groups of where there is a lot of drug use,
yeah.
groups where there is a lot of stuff happening that will break the girl's heart or lead her down a path that's really unhealthy,
Yeah.
really unhealthy. A lot of girls are abused into a gang here. That's a thing here in America, where there'll be a gang and the girl will get abused into the gang. And that's really a bad thing. So obviously, the more you can take part and prevent those outcomes, the better. But that emotional connectedness is a key piece, and also the food you put on the table. I should say what the book is about a little bit,
Yeah.
because with the lifestyle medicine is a branch of medicine that got started in 2017. I'm proud to say I was part of that initial class, board certified in lifestyle medicine in 2017. These are the evidence-based ways of creating health, essentially, and often reversing diseases that exist,
Yeah.
both physical and mental. That's lifestyle medicine. Lifestyle medicine exists within 6 domains. It's the evidence for nutrition, detox from substances, heavy metals, poisonous chemicals. So nutrition and detox, those are kind of like the fundamentals. And then exercise and sleep, those are kind of like the quick fixes. And then emotional connectedness and stress reduction, those are the very, meat and potatoes, you could say. Those are the very fundamentals, where the most effort should be put in those basic emotional connectedness and stress reduction of your kid. And so in lifestyle medicine and then lifestyle psychiatry is the branch of psychiatry. It's not board certified yet in itself. We're still in the process of figuring out what it is, but it's all of that stuff within lifestyle medicine that conduces to good mental health, towards stress reduction, reduction of depression, reduction of the harmful self-harming behaviors, the drug use, all of the things that can really spiral your kid out. So it's the evidence base, what to do in all of those domains. And so we just spoke a little bit about nutrition. For that nutrition piece, it's the whole food plant-based diet has the most evidence for health, for mental health, and for longevity, living longer if you're eating the whole food, unprocessed, plant-based, 90% plant, only 10% animal protein diet. That ensures a good nutritional foundation for your health, prevention of diseases, and also the basis for mental health. Because what people don't realize is that a deficiency of any one of the B vitamins, for example, any one, can cause psychosis, let alone depression. And the author Charles Popper has a lot out on that in terms of, scientific articles. Charles Popper has given talks before the NIMH. This is the National Institutes of Mental Health in America, that are available on YouTube. He talks about the significance of having complete nutrition for mental health, and how without that, no amount of painting over the surface with psych drugs will help if the problem is a real deficiency. So depleting with that good diet and appropriate supplementation at times. You know, certainly the supplements can accelerate them if they're good, pure ones, such as, I'll just give you a name. Truehope.com out of Canada has a good brand called Empower Plus, oldest, best studied, like over 50 studies of the efficacy of that on mental health outcomes. So nutrition, and then detox from not only from substances, the alcohol self-medication, the cannabis self-medication, but also from all of the heavy metals that are in the processed food supply, that are in tap water. At least in America, those heavy metals are in your tap water. Detox from chlorine outgassing under every sink. You know, those horrible laundry chemicals, cleansers under the sink, heavy metals. So detox from substances and harmful chemicals, getting them out of your life, the drugs, getting the poisons, literally poisons, out of your house, any insecticides, any air fresheners, which are actually neurotoxic, getting that out of your home. So nutrition and detox, those are really essential. And everybody already knows about the importance of exercise and sleep, but they don't realize, most people don't realize, that a head-to-head study of the antidepressant, SSRI type antidepressant Zoloft, was done head-to-head with exercise, and it wasn't even that much exercise. And guess what? The exercise was just as good as the antidepressant Zoloft. And I think the exercise was minimal, like 30 minutes 3 times a week, something very minimal like that.
It
turns out.
It's quite extraordinary how much benefit you get from regular exercise.
Yeah, it's a real quick fix. Yeah, what you get, what people don't realize, is that as you're exercising, you're doing a couple things. You're improving cardiovascular health, sure, but you're also sweating out. Your body is sweating out poisonous toxins. They find heavy metals in sweat all the time. And also, as you exercise, your brain is releasing more dopamine, norepinephrine,
All the
oxytocin, all of these good feel-good, orexin, which is called the hope molecule, endogenous cannabinoids, all of these really good molecules your body releases in spades when you're exercising. So that's good for you for a lot of reasons.
I would add on a little bit more. If you can exercise in a park, you're getting even more. If you can get out and
even more,
such an
take it outside, because then you're getting outdoor air is, well, indoor air is 100 times more toxic than outdoor air. We know that. And so immediately you're getting the fresh air. Immediately you're getting the sunlight. One of the reasons that we feel bad is that we literally are deficient in vitamin D. We feel bad. We feel our immune systems aren't functioning properly, and they aren't if we have low vitamin D. So yeah, just getting out there, getting the clean air, the sunshine, obviously not, high noon for an hour, anything that's going to cause skin cancer, but sunlight is so important for our health and for our sleep. What people don't realize is that all of those sleep hygiene measures, they measure them all of this head to head. The number one most powerful thing you can do for sleep is getting 30 minutes of sunshine daily. Who knew? But outdoors, high noon, 100,000 lux, indoor, 4,000 lux. So we're actually sitting in the dark right now. Our eyes have adjusted, but we're sitting in the dark, and our body knows that. And our circadian rhythms, keeping good circadian rhythms, is fundamentally important. We need, and once you get exposed to that bright thing out there in the sky at noon, your body knows when it's day and when it's night.
And
if you're holed up inside, your body isn't necessarily even going to know when it's day and when it's night. So sleep is all fragmented and disrupted and dysregulated, and that in itself can cause weight gain. It can cause poor mental health. So sleep, so fundamental, sleep.
So this is all included in the book. It's great advice.
Absolutely. The book goes by systematically the six domains of lifestyle medicine, lifestyle psychiatry, nutrition, detox, and how to do that. Exercise, many ways in which you can do that and make it social and take it outside. Sleep, how to get good sleep, guaranteed evidence-based ways of getting good sleep and enough of it. Emotional connectedness and how to approach that, how to approach emotional connectedness by getting to know and like and approve and accept yourself first, knowing your likes, dislikes, values, boundaries, etc., then reaching out to others with the help of protective parents, you know, how to do all of these things safely, how to connect. And then stress reduction. Often, I think parents don't realize too, they say, oh yeah, kids are just anxious now, but they don't realize they are also under amazingly higher levels of stress than anything that was experienced before. I mean, you mentioned PTSD in World War II, maybe that's an exception, but the school system now is geared toward being maximally stressful, at least here in America. Here in America, they now have these online systems of grading where, you know, say you hand in your grade is given you in real time, and often it's lagging behind multiple assignments and the teacher hasn't graded them yet. So you're like 0, 0, 0, 0, you know, for all these assignments that just haven't been graded yet. And you're like, your grade is showing up as a D or something. It's like, oh no, what am I going to do? What if she doesn't find me? I say, what if she doesn't, you know, and these kids are living on their computers, looking at their grade until the teacher gets the assignment. And it's so stressful to have that low grade hanging there. Many kids just say, I give up. I just can't take the stress of that. And it's engineered into the public school systems in America that you're going to be stressed out 24/7, not knowing what's going on, whether you're going to pass or not, head to the factory or be able to go to college. You know, you just don't know.
And I think that people don't understand, particularly those people that might complain about children being snowflakes these days, that there are, you know, there are two ways to destroy yourself. One is quickly, which is put you on a battlefield. That will destroy you pretty quickly. Or very slowly and insidiously over time by having high levels of stress that you don't know how to manage, that don't look dramatic, but actually over time destroy you. And that's what's happening to our children at the moment, which I think you've so brilliantly described. We've put children, I mean, I'm, you know, I find it's a very difficult subject for me personally, because I have a son who has ADHD. And so I'm fully aware of how destructive education systems are towards children, particularly towards children like him. I'm lucky that we have choices about the school he goes to and we can help him, and we've been working with the teachers and they're very responsive. But the education systems, I think, around the globe now towards children are anti-child and anti-human. I don't think they service anybody, to be honest. And I think
Yeah,
it's
I agree.
really problematic what our kids are going through at the moment with education. And there needs to be some fundamental root and branch change. We have to finish off, I'm afraid. I told you the hour would go quickly and it's gone.
Oh, okay.
Already happened. But I just want to, for a UK audience, I want to reinforce a couple of points and things that make it relevant, if you like, to the UK audience. Some of whom might be thinking, who is this person from California talking about lifestyles? And switch off. So I want to point out to people in the UK, currently, general practitioners, the family doctors, you might call them in America, have what's called social prescribing. And social prescribing is now favoured rather than giving out SSRIs. And social prescribing is literally your GP will give you a prescription to go and join a group. Rather than medication. Right.
That's wonderful. We don't have that here in the US, but that's wonderful. Social prescribing. I'm writing it down. I definitely do that, but I'm one of the very few. It's part of lifestyle medicine here.
The evidence base for what Dr. Green is saying is unequivocal. It is
absolutely
unassailable that what's happened, why we are so ill, is because we live ill lifestyles, and we can change our lives, make them well. And that also needs to happen at a social, political, societal level. And one of the reasons why girls are so ill at the moment is because we are making them ill by what we are doing to them. And it needs to change. And we can change it. This isn't inevitable. It is It is
We
some
we do need to educate ourselves, though. We need to educate ourselves. And some people say, "Oh, lifestyle medicine, it's so common sense." But no, it's only common sense to the grandparents and great grandparents. It's not common sense to the new generation of parents.
but
It's not common sense to the parents. They have to actually relearn and educate themselves about what is the evidence for these and prove it to them. It's like you have to prove it to them now. Yeah, this is the way to eat. This is the way to go. And show the evidence and trot out all of the evidence and all of the studies. And that's what I did in the book. I trotted out all the evidence for these 6 domains and then said, here's what it is and here's how to do it. And so
it's
just
funny because
does seem counterintuitive that you need to re-educate people about these things, but unfortunately we do.
you will know this as well. One of the resistances to things like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, is when you start teaching people about cognitive behavioral therapy, they say, can't work, it's too simple. That's one of the most resistances. It works because it's simple, and it just is you with what works. And things that work, and this is really important for folks to understand, the stuff that works often is quite straightforward and quite simple, and you can embrace without a huge amount of effort. We need to stop subcontracting our mental health to mental health professionals like me. I should be redundant. I should be
Well, I think really both are necessary. For example, just the inpatient mental health system. What this does, the benefit of that is that locked door. You're put somewhere for a week, so you cannot harm yourself. You cannot kill yourself. The locked door is the benefit. Now, there is a role for that. If someone is suicidal, they need that. And then they need the follow-up that's appropriate. They need to be talking to someone who can help, because obviously the help available in their life right now is not doing it, or they wouldn't be trying to kill themselves. So they do need those professionals. That said, once that phase of protected care is over, ultimately kids are going to go back to that home that caused that sickness in the first place. And so parents need to educate themselves again, or re-educate themselves, and really learn what is lifestyle medicine, what is lifestyle psychiatry, what do we know works. People say, I want to eat healthy, but what's that? It's not what people think. It's not what people think. I assure you, it's not that burger and chips or whatever. It's not necessarily that processed fish. Even 100% of fish, freshwater fish, contain unhealthy levels of mercury and God knows what else, dioxins, PFOA. It's not necessarily what you would think. So there is a need for us culturally and collectively to re-educate ourselves. There are good websites like ACLM, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. I suppose there's a British one as well. Or some of the books. There are wonderful textbooks. The biggest tome on lifestyle medicine is by James M. Rippey, R-I-P-P-E. It's a big tome, though. Nobody has time to get through that, really, realistically, unless you're in the field. Like those of us board certified, we go through that. But you can get how-to guides. You can educate yourself, and those are increasingly becoming available.
We're going to have to, I could let you go on for hours, to be honest, because it's great. It's sort of really inspiring work that you're doing. I'm really excited that I've had you on. So remind me the name of the book, and where might people buy it if they want to know more?
Oh, okay. The book is by Cheryl L. Green, MD. It's called Heal Your Daughter: How Lifestyle Psychiatry Can Save Her from Depression, Cutting, and Suicidal Thoughts. It's all the evidence in all those 6 domains, how to concretely create an ecosystem of mental health and physical health within the home, while you can still control that to some degree with your high school kids. So that's what it's about. And it's available just about everywhere. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. It's available on BookBaby. It's in most bookstores here in the US. I don't know about availability there. And it's available in print, in ebook, and it's available in Audible. It's an audiobook. I recorded it myself because I thought maybe some of the professionals would trip over some of the concepts or the pronunciation of the concepts. So it's just an unprofessional, it's my own voice on the Audible version. So sorry about that. I'm not a professional voice actor. I wish I were. So
And
there are some glitches, I'm sure.
do you have a website where people might be able to sort of connect with you?
Yeah, I have a website, and the website does have little videos of me explaining the 6 domains of lifestyle. So if you want to connect with that, you can. It's just CherylLGreenMD.com, and it's CHERYL, a second L, green like the color, GREEN, MD.com. So that's there. I can't see patients professionally in England unless I guess I were to do some sort of just strictly consulting, not medical, because here I can only practice medicine in the states where I'm licensed. But I do businesses, business consulting, that kind of thing too, if any business wants to work with me.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure, Dr. Green, to have you on the show. Thank you
Well,
so
thank
much.
you, Noel.
Thanks for coming along. Going to have to finish there now because we're way past time because it's such a fascinating
Okay.
subject. But maybe at some point in the future, we'll ask you to come back and you can tell us more about your practice and how things are going. I'll get my team to sort of reach out to you and we can have a look at that. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye and wish you a lovely.
Okay. Well, thank you, and best wishes to you too, Noel. Good. It's nice to get to know you a little bit here. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye now.